What would drive an empress to disguise herself and sneak out of the palace at night to work in the city's pleasure houses? The answer lies in the extraordinary life of Valeria Messalina, Rome's most infamous empress. In October of 48 AD, while Emperor Claudius performed official duties at the port city of Ostia, his wife, Valeria Messalina, married another man in a formal ceremony complete with witnesses, dowry contracts, and religious sacrifices. The most powerful woman in the known world had just committed bigamy while her husband still ruled the empire. Yet this wedding was merely the final chapter of a life that had already become synonymous with excess and transgression. Ancient writers spoke of an empress who disguised herself with a blonde wig and slipped out of the palace at night to work in the city's houses of ill repute under the alias the Chivalth. They recorded a competition in which she challenged Rome's most celebrated courtesan to determine who could entertain more men in a single day and night. They documented a trail of bodies left behind by her jealousy and desire. Prominent Romans who met their deaths because they either refused her advances or stood in the way of her appetites. The satirist Juvenal gave her a title that would follow her through the centuries: Meretrix Augusta, the imperial harlot. Her name became a byword for depravity that echoed far beyond the ancient world. Charlotte Brontë invoked her in Jane Eyre when describing a woman of uncontrollable passions. Mikhail Bulgakov seated her among the damned at Satan's ball in The Master and Margarita. Painters across centuries depicted her nocturnal wanderings through the dark streets of Rome. The Roman Senate ordered her memory erased from history. Yet 2,000 years later, she remains more famous than almost any empress who followed her. But who was this woman who inspired such lurid accounts and universal condemnation from the ancient world? Was she truly the depraved monster of Roman legend? A creature driven entirely by insatiable lust and murderous jealousy? Or was she something more complex? A young woman navigating the deadly waters of imperial politics who became the victim of history's most successful smear campaign. The teenage Empress Valeria Messalina was born around 17 to 20 AD into the most powerful family in the known world. Her blood connected her to virtually every emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. She was great-grandniece of Augustus, second cousin to Caligula, and first cousin to the future Emperor Nero. Through her mother Domitia Lepida, she carried the blood of Mark Antony himself. This extraordinary lineage determined her fate before she reached adulthood. Around 38 AD, when Messalina was somewhere between 14 and 18 years old, she was married to her own relative, Tiberius Claudius. He was 47 years old, walked with a limp, stammered when he spoke, and had been mocked by his own family for decades. His mother had called him a monster. Emperor Augustus had banned him from sitting with the family at public events. Nobody expected this limping scholar to amount to anything significant. Messalina had no say in the match. Roman daughters of her status existed to produce heirs and strengthen political alliances. Her feelings about marrying a man 30 years, her senior, with visible disabilities, went unrecorded because they were irrelevant to everyone involved. She proved her value quickly by bearing a daughter, Claudia Octavia, within a year of the marriage. Then everything changed overnight. In January 41 AD, Emperor Caligula was stabbed to death by his own guards. Soldiers searching the palace found Claudius hiding behind a curtain in terror. Rather than killing him, they declared him Emperor of Rome. The stammering outcast suddenly controlled the mightiest empire on earth. his teenage wife became Empress. 3 weeks after Claudius took the throne, Messalina gave birth to a son named Britannicus, making her the mother of the imperial heir. She was barely 20 years old, married to an elderly husband she had not chosen, and now possessed more power than almost any woman in Roman history. What she chose to do with that power would shock Rome for generations. The She-Wolf. The satirist Juvenal wrote his 6th satire in the early 2nd century AD as a scathing attack on the morals of Roman women. Within this lengthy poem, he devoted particular attention to Valeria Messalina, providing details that have defined her reputation for 2,000 years. According to Juvenal, the Empress developed a routine that she followed whenever opportunity allowed. She would retire to the imperial bedchamber with Claudius and wait patiently beside him until sleep overtook the aging emperor. Once his breathing grew heavy and steady, she would rise silently from the royal bed and begin her transformation. She concealed her distinctive black hair beneath a wig of reddish blonde and covered her face with a hooded cloak to avoid recognition on the streets. Taking only a single servant as companion, the most powerful woman in Rome slipped out of the palace and walked through the darkened city toward the Subura district. The Subura was infamous throughout the Roman world as a neighborhood of narrow alleys, cramped apartment buildings, cheap taverns, and establishments that catered to the physical desires of men. Respectable Romans avoided the area after sunset, but this was precisely where Messalina directed her steps on these nocturnal expeditions. Her destination was a specific house of ill repute, where she had arranged for a private cell to be reserved under a false identity. The name she chose for herself was Lysiska, a Latin word that translates as the She-Wolf. This alias carried deliberate significance in Roman culture, where the term lupa referred both to the animal that nursed Romulus and Remus and to women who sold physical companionship for money. Juvenal described her preparations within that small rented chamber in terms that left nothing to imagination. She removed her disguise and presented herself to any paying customer who entered her cell throughout the night. She reportedly charged fees and collected payment just as the regular workers of the establishment did. The poet emphasized that she remained at her station long after other women had departed for the evening. When the keeper of the house announced closing time and extinguished the lamps, Messalina reportedly argued for permission to continue and left only when physically forced to do so. Her walk back to the imperial palace occurred in the gray light before dawn. Her disguise restored, but her hair disheveled and her skin carrying the evidence of her nocturnal activities. Juvenal's most memorable line described her returning to the royal bed, still burning with desires that even an entire night had failed to satisfy. She would then lie down beside the still sleeping Claudius, as though nothing had happened, ready to resume her role as empress when morning arrived. This account painted a portrait of compulsion beyond ordinary pleasure-seeking, suggesting appetites that no amount of indulgence could ever fully satisfy. The competition Pliny, the Elder, was not a satirist seeking to entertain through exaggeration or a poet crafting verses for dramatic effect. He was a Roman military commander, administrator, and natural philosopher who compiled an encyclopedic work called Natural History that covered subjects ranging from astronomy and geography to medicine and zoology. His writings were intended as serious documentation of the world as Romans understood it. Within this monumental scholarly work, Pliny included a claim about Messalina that has echoed through centuries of historical writing. He recorded that the Empress arranged a formal competition with the most celebrated professional courtesan in all of Rome to determine which woman could entertain more men within a fixed period of time. Later writers gave this courtesan the name Scylla, though Pliny himself did not identify her beyond her profession and her fame within it. She was reportedly the most successful practitioner of her trade in the entire city, a woman whose skills had made her wealthy and whose reputation attracted clients from the highest levels of Roman society. The challenge that Messalina proposed was straightforward in its vulgarity. Both women would receive an unlimited number of male visitors over a period lasting 24 consecutive hours. And whoever achieved the higher count at the end of that marathon would be declared the winner. Pliny recorded the outcome as established fact without any indication that he doubted the accuracy of his information. When the competition finally concluded, after a full day and night of continuous activity, Messalina had achieved a score of 25 partners, defeating the professional at the very craft that defined her livelihood and reputation. The implications of this account troubled historians even in ancient times. The physical demands of such a contest would have been extraordinary, and the logistics of arranging such an event without word reaching the emperor seemed nearly impossible to imagine. Yet Pliny presented the story alongside botanical observations and geographical measurements as though it were simply another documented phenomenon worthy of scholarly record. Modern historians have debated endlessly whether this competition actually occurred, or whether Pliny was simply repeating gossip that had calcified into accepted truth during the decades following Messalina's death. The fact remains that a serious Roman intellectual felt confident enough in the story to include it in his life's work without qualification or disclaimer, whether literally true or elaborately invented. The story communicated something that Romans apparently believed about their former empress. She was not merely a woman who enjoyed physical pleasures outside her marriage, which would have been scandalous but not unprecedented among the Roman elite. She was a woman whose appetites exceeded those of professionals who devoted their entire lives to satisfying the desires of men. The competition with Scylla became one of the defining stories of Messalina's legend, precisely because it suggested that her drives operated beyond any normal human scale, that she pursued physical satisfaction with the same relentless intensity that others pursued wealth or political power. The jealous empress, what distinguished Messalina from ordinary adulterers, was how she allegedly weaponized her relationships for political and financial advantage. Roman sources recorded that she used physical access to herself as a form of currency, granting favors to men who could advance her interests and selling her influence over the emperor to nobles and foreign dignitaries seeking advantages at court. Those who sought appointments, favorable judgments, or imperial patronage understood that pleasing the empress could open doors that remained firmly shut to others. The bedroom and the throne room became intertwined in ways that corrupted the entire machinery of Roman government during her years of dominance. But Messalina's appetites also generated a possessive jealousy that proved fatal for anyone who competed for the attention of men she desired. Poppaea Sabina the Elder was celebrated throughout Rome as one of the great beauties of her generation. She attracted the admiration of many prominent Romans, including men whose affections Messalina considered exclusively her own. When the empress discovered that Poppaea had captured the genuine attention of lovers she wanted for herself, she launched a campaign of destruction against her rival. Papaya was conducting an affair with the wealthy senator Valerius Asiaticus, who owned the magnificent gardens of Lucullus that Messalina had long coveted for herself. The Empress recognized an opportunity to destroy her romantic rival while simultaneously acquiring the most beautiful private estate in Rome. She convinced Claudius to arrest Asiaticus on fabricated charges, including military misconduct and improper relations with Papaya. The trial took place privately in the emperor's own bedroom, with Messalina watching from concealment behind a curtain. Asiaticus was condemned and chose to open his veins in his beloved gardens, which Messalina promptly claimed as her reward from the grateful emperor. With Asiaticus eliminated, Messalina turned her full attention toward Papaya herself. She arranged for prosecution proceedings that would expose her rival to public humiliation and certain condemnation, rather than endure whatever torments Messalina had planned for her. Papaya Sabina took her own life before the proceedings could begin. The destruction of Papaya sent an unmistakable message throughout Roman society about the consequences of competing with the Empress for any man she considered her own property. Deadly desires, the price of refusing Messalina's attention, was not simply loss of favor or social embarrassment, but death itself. Ancient sources documented multiple prominent Romans who met their end specifically because they declined her advances or interfered with her romantic pursuits. Appius Junius Caelianus learned this lesson within the first year of Claudius's reign. This distinguished military commander had governed Spain and led Roman legions with honor before being summoned back to Rome and married to Messalina's own mother, Domitia Lepida. According to Tacitus and Cassius Dio, Messalina developed a fascination with her new stepfather and made her interest unmistakably clear to him. Caelianus refused to betray his new wife with her own daughter, a decision that sealed his fate. Messalina conspired with the freedman Narcissus to construct an elaborate trap. In early 42 AD, both appeared before Claudius, claiming they had experienced identical dreams during the night showing. Caelianus creeping through the palace with a blade to murder the emperor. When Caelianus arrived at the imperial chambers that same morning on a fabricated summons, the superstitious Claudius saw a confirmation of the prophetic visions and ordered his immediate execution without any trial or investigation. Marcus Vinicius came from one of the most distinguished families in Rome and had been mentioned as a potential emperor before Claudius took the throne. According to Cassius Dio, he attracted Messalina's interest but refused to pursue a relationship with the emperor's wife. Shortly afterward, Vinicius died suddenly under circumstances that pointed unmistakably toward poison. Though no formal accusation was ever made and no investigation followed, the freedman Polybius served as one of Claudius's most trusted secretaries, handling literary and scholarly matters for the emperor. Ancient sources suggest that unlike Caelianus and Vinicius, Polybius actually accepted Messalina's attention and became her lover for a period of time. His fate demonstrated that satisfying her desires provided no lasting protection either. When Messalina eventually grew bored with him, she arranged his execution on unspecified charges without apparent hesitation. These deaths established a pattern that every ambitious Roman understood clearly. Attracting the Empress's interest created a trap from which escape was nearly impossible. Refusing her meant destruction through fabricated accusations and imperial justice. Accepting her meant temporary favor, followed by eventual disposal when her attention moved elsewhere. The safest course was to avoid her notice entirely. But for handsome and prominent men in Roman society, invisibility was not always achievable. The Palace of Pleasure. The Greek historian Cassius Dio compiled his Roman history more than a century and a half after Messalina's death, drawing upon earlier sources that have since been lost to time. His account of the Empress added dimensions to her reputation that went beyond even the claims of Juvenal and Pliny, suggesting that her activities extended into the imperial palace itself. According to Dio, Messalina was not content with her own pursuits and sought to involve other members of Roman high society in her private entertainments. She allegedly transformed sections of the imperial residence into a functioning establishment where she could host gatherings that served her particular interests and amusements. The most disturbing element of Dio's account involved the wives of Roman aristocrats. He claimed that Messalina compelled noblewomen to participate in encounters with men other than their husbands within the walls of the palace. These were not willing participants seeking excitement, but women who faced destruction if they refused the commands of the Empress. Dio further alleged that the husbands of these women were forced to be present and watch as their wives entertained strangers at Messalina's direction. Any man who displayed jealousy or objected to his wife's treatment faced immediate prosecution on fabricated charges. Those who cooperated and concealed their humiliation might receive political advancement or financial rewards for their compliant behavior. Beyond these organized gatherings, the ancient sources documented a parade of individual companions who passed through Messalina's chambers over the years of her time as Empress. The dancer and actor Mestor became her most prominent long-term attachment within the palace. He initially resisted her interest, understanding the dangers of involvement with the emperor's wife. Messalina solved this problem by complaining to Claudius that Mestor was being disobedient to her wishes. The oblivious emperor summoned Nestor and directly commanded him to comply with whatever Messalina requested, effectively ordering a man to become his own wife's lover. Tacitus recorded that she also pursued gladiators, men whose fame in the arena and physical prowess attracted her attention. These relationships carried particular scandal in Roman society, where gladiators occupied the lowest rungs of social respectability, despite their celebrity status among common people. Suetonius added that senators, soldiers, and freedmen all received her attentions at various times. The variety of her companions suggested appetites that recognized no boundaries of social class or propriety. A slave might share her bed one night and a consul the next, with professional entertainers and arena fighters filling the intervals between. The cumulative portrait from these ancient sources depicted a woman operating entirely without restraint or concern for consequences. The palace that should have represented the dignity and authority of the Roman state had allegedly become her personal domain of indulgence, where she alone determined who would participate and who would suffer for refusing. Whether every detail was accurate or whether hostile sources amplified and invented, the Romans clearly believed their empress had corrupted the very heart of their government, fact or slander. The accusations against Messalina raise an unavoidable question that historians have debated for centuries. How much of this was actually true, and how much was political propaganda designed to destroy her memory after death? The sources themselves present immediate problems for anyone seeking reliable truth. Tacitus composed his histories approximately 70 years after Messalina's execution. Suetonius wrote his imperial biographies around the same period. Cassius Dio produced his Roman history more than 150 years after the events he described. None of these men witnessed anything personally, and all relied on earlier accounts produced by writers hostile to the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Tacitus openly acknowledged that one of his primary sources was the personal memoirs of Agrippina the Younger, the woman who replaced Messalina as empress and whose son Nero displaced Britannicus as heir. Agrippina possessed every conceivable motive to blacken her predecessor's reputation, and her memoirs were hardly the work of a neutral observer seeking historical accuracy. Juvenal, who provided the most explicit descriptions of nocturnal activities in the pleasure houses of Rome, was a professional satirist whose entire craft depended on exaggeration and mockery for entertainment purposes. His work was never intended as factual documentation of actual events. The Romans also maintained a long tradition of attacking powerful women through accusations of improper conduct. Cleopatra had been labeled a harlot queen by Augustan propagandists seeking to justify war against her. Julia the Elder, daughter of Augustus himself, was exiled on charges that many historians consider politically motivated rather than genuinely proven, yet completely dismissing all accusations against Messalina presents its own difficulties. Multiple independent sources from different periods consistently emphasized identical themes about her conduct and character. Something in her behavior clearly disturbed Roman society enough to generate this unprecedented volume of hostile documentation that persisted for generations. The truth likely exists somewhere between complete fabrication and literal accuracy. The forbidden wedding Gaius Silius possessed everything that Emperor Claudius lacked. He was young, healthy, and extraordinarily handsome, described by Tacitus as the most attractive man of his generation in Rome. He came from an ancient and distinguished family with impeccable political credentials, and he had already been designated consul for the following year, marking him as one of the rising stars of the Roman Senate. He was also already married to an aristocratic woman named Junia Silana when Messalina decided she wanted him for herself. According to Tacitus, she pursued Silius with an intensity that surpassed all her previous infatuations. She visited his home openly and frequently, making no effort to conceal her interest from Roman society. She showered him with gifts and imperial favor, using her influence to advance his political career. The affair became common knowledge throughout the city, while Claudius remained characteristically oblivious. Messalina required Silius to divorce his wife before she would be satisfied with the arrangement. He complied without resistance, casting aside Junia Silana to make himself fully available to the Empress. But even this sacrifice did not satisfy her growing obsession with him. She began transferring imperial property from the palace to his home, including furniture, artwork, slaves, and treasured heirlooms belonging to the Claudian family. She was establishing a second imperial household centered entirely on her lover. Tacitus recorded that Silius eventually proposed something extraordinary and dangerous. He argued that continuing their affair in secret served no purpose since everyone in Rome already knew the truth about them. He suggested they should marry openly and seize power before Claudius discovered their relationship and destroyed them both. In October of 48 AD, while Claudius traveled to Ostia for official ceremonies, Messalina summoned witnesses, priests, and augurs to the home of Gaius Silius. Formal contracts were signed, and religious rituals performed according to ancient Roman tradition. What followed was a celebration that would echo through 2,000 years of history. Wine flowed from overflowing vats as women dressed in animal skins danced through the halls like frenzied bacons. The Empress herself loosened her hair and waved the sacred thyrsus, while her new husband, crowned with ivy, presided over the revelry. Rome had witnessed countless scandals within the imperial palace, but nothing quite matched this public mockery of the emperor's authority and dignity. The Empress of Rome had married another man while her husband still lived and still ruled the empire. Death in the gardens. News of the wedding reached Ostia through the freedman Narcissus, who understood that his own survival depended on destroying Messalina before she could consolidate power with Silius. He persuaded two of Claudius's favorite concubines to deliver the devastating news directly to the emperor. Tacitus recorded that Claudius responded with paralyzing terror, repeatedly asking his advisors whether he was still emperor and whether Silius had already seized control of the government. The man who commanded legions across 3 continents seemed unable to comprehend that his own wife had publicly discarded him. Narcissus took command of the situation while Claudius remained frozen by shock and humiliation. He organized the emperor's immediate return to Rome and ensured that soldiers arrested the conspirators without delay. Silius made no attempt to flee or resist when soldiers arrived at his home, asking only for a quick death and receiving it without ceremony. Other members of the wedding party faced similar swift executions. Messalina escaped the initial arrests and fled to the gardens of Lucullus, the magnificent estate she had obtained by orchestrating the death of Valerius Asiaticus. Her mother, Domitia Lepida, joined her there as they waited to learn whether the Empress would survive her greatest gamble. As Claudius dined that evening, his anger began softening into something resembling pity. He referred to Messalina as the poor woman and expressed desire to hear her explanation the following morning. Narcissus recognized that any delay meant her potential survival through manipulation of the emperor. Without waiting for explicit authorization, he dispatched soldiers to the gardens with orders to execute her immediately. Messalina's mother urged her to accept death with dignity by taking her own life. Messalina took a blade but could not force herself to use it, pressing the edge against her throat without drawing blood. When the tribune entered the gardens, he drove his sword through her body without hesitation. The Senate ordered her name erased from all records and her statues destroyed throughout the empire. Rome tried to forget her, but never succeeded.